Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Applying to the Canola Agronomic Research Program webinar here. Hopefully you'll be able to pick up some tips and tricks on how to apply to this year's current intake. Today we have a number of funders for the Canola Agronomic Research Program joining me today as well. But first, just a little introduction. My name is Chris Mancher. I'm the Manager of Research, Innovation, and Resilience, and I help administer this program. Joined with us also is Brittany Vischer, Research Director with Alberta Canola, Doug Heath, Research Manager with SaskOilseeds, and Amy Delacki with the Manitoba Canola Growers as the Research and Agronomy Manager. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen for the presentation slides. This Canola Agronomic Research Program is in partnership with our provincial canola grower associations and commissions, as well as Results-Driven Agricultural Research and the Western Grains Research Foundation. Just to provide again a quick overview of today's webinar, I'll be providing a quick introduction to CARP as a funding program, including historical review of what we've seen over the past few years, all the way going back to 1994 for some of this data. Then I'll go and dive into some tips and elements of a successful application, both for the letter of intent and the full proposal stage. And then lastly, I'll cap it off with this year's intakes timelines. So important dates for you to be aware of when it comes to submitting your letter of intent, and what can you expect for full proposal submissions and ultimately potentially funding decisions. Following this, I will pass the mic off to our research managers and directors to provide a little bit of perspectives from each of their own groups, as well as highlighting the priorities for research for this current intake. And then, of course, lastly, we'll have our Q&A panel. Okay, so I mentioned that we have some information from all the way back in 1994, but to our knowledge, this has been a program that's been going back all the way to 1985. So this is a long-standing research program that supports yield, production, profitability, eliminating risks, and also enhancing sustainability. So just kind of touching on a little bit of the history of this, I was able to pull up in our files our applicant form from all the way back in 2003, and just picked out one of the quotes here looking at, how this program has evolved, where back then we were looking at projects funded for amounts of $5,000 to $20,000 yearly. So that's not a whole lot in today's terms when we're thinking about research and also thinking about the scope of some of the projects we see right now. But it's interesting to see where we've come from and then likely where we're also going. Thinking back, this is a quick screenshot of our calls for letters of intent back in 2016, so that's already 10 years ago. And one thing that's really stood true is that collaboration across the canola value chain and specifically the canola grower associations has really strengthened our research and innovation base here. What that has allowed us to do is to address the challenges and improve production across our prairies, and remains to be a core focus for when we're thinking about applying to this program and the work that is within it. So, as mentioned, going all the way back to 1994, we have some data here just taking a look at what the total annual funding of CARP has been. So this is the cash contributions on behalf of our funding partners through this program. And you can note that over the 1990s and 2000s, it was fairly low at that point. And now we've seen already a record just even this past year in 2026, where almost just about $4 million of funding was awarded through CARP. And that was given towards 11 projects. And if you'd like more information on those projects, you'll be able to find our press release either on the Canola Council website or on our funding organization's press releases as well. Now, how that money was awarded, we can take a look at it two different ways. We can take a look at the amount of projects that were successfully approved for funding, or what was the average funding per CARP project. So one thing that really stands out to me is that we've been fairly consistent in the number of projects that have been funded, ranging from, maybe 6 on the low side in most cases, all the way up to 12 or 13 on the high side. So while that has been remaining kind of consistent between that 6 to 12, what has definitely changed is the cost per project. And so we can think about this in the context of just general inflation. Costs to conduct research are steadily increasing, as well as potentially the focus areas of this research have also changed. The Canola Agronomic Research Program may have been addressing different priorities in the past. Now we see a lot more genetics, pre-breeding, omics type work that happens today, and those also have their own costs. So as of 2026, the average cost per project was just over $350,000. Another thing to note here as well is the duration of these projects. So I would say the majority of our projects, even though we don't have the data here, is between 3 to 5 years, essentially. Okay, rather than going back all the way to 1994, we took a look at the past 8 years in terms of what we've seen for LOIs submitted, how many proposals were advanced from that LOI stage, and then also the number of projects that were approved for funding. So over this period of time, we would say it would be between that 30 to even in the high point of 60 something LOIs that were received. And then you would whittle that down to about a third, maybe under a half, that actually advanced to the full proposal stage. Going a little bit further there, we would then see about maybe a 20 or 25% success rate for projects that are actually funded. So this is definitely a reflection of the scrutiny that happens at both stages in terms of what we're looking for in an LOI that has merit, a lot of the other kind of review parameters that comes at the full proposal stage, and then ultimately also what funds are available and what our funders value in terms of what they would like to see for that current intake year. So this is a big question here in terms of who actually gets funded through CARP. And I do recognize from the attendees present today live here, we have a very great cross-section in terms of attendees from the private industry, universities, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, as well as some others. And so I want to recognize that this is essentially where the distribution of funds over the past 8 years have been, or 8 to 7 years. A lot of these funds are primarily directed towards academic public research institutions. So that includes the universities such as the U of M, U of A. Other universities also include University of Saskatchewan, University of Guelph, University of Calgary, as well as some others. And then the other portion there as well is at AFC Saskatoon, where there is a significant portion of canola-focused research happening there in that city. That being said, we do have some funding that does go towards other organizations, and I think it's important to note that most organizations are eligible to be funded. The information we're showing you here today is essentially who are the lead organizations for these projects, but often we do see collaborations across the whole value chain, research and innovation. And so that can include collaborations with colleges, it can include collaborations with private industry representatives and companies. We do see quite a mix of different proposals that come through CARP. So here's another interesting pie chart that we'd want to take a look at today, and that regards where's the distribution of the research dollars invested through CARP across the topics for canola. So just a quick glance at this, we could almost say that half of the research dollars invested through CARP goes towards addressing diseases of canola. And then we have another quarter that takes a look at some of our major insect pests. And so, of course, one of the ones top of mind, and I think in a recent report showed has the greatest economic impact, is flea beetles. We also take a look at other ones, such as some minor pests that may be becoming an emerging threat. We have some pre-breeding, physiology-based projects that may be taking a look at abiotic stress resilience or other breeding mechanisms or pre-breeding activities. And then we have a diverse selection kind of occupying that less than a quarter, taking a look at soils fertility, some agronomic practices, relating to plant establishment, weeds, and then even some technologies or end-use applications here. One thing to note, I would say on this, is that this isn't respective of where all the dollars in canola research and innovation go towards. We see a lot of other funding programs that also address different topics, especially ones that are cross-commodity. And so you may expect ones, say, like soils fertility rotation studies to be happening within those programs. But given CARP is a very canola specific program, we would expect more canola specific concerns to be addressed here. So if there are any questions, I would definitely encourage you to to place them in our Q&A chat. We will have opportunities to go and answer them at the end during our Q&A panel. But now we will get on to what are the elements of a successful application. Okay, so a lot of these tips and information I will be providing today is going to be related to both the LOI and the full proposal stage. The letter of intent stage is very much kind of that high-level overview that gives us essentially a taste of what your proposal, your finished proposal would be like. So it's important to include an appropriate level of information while sticking to the application form guidelines. Okay, so I'm going to split this up into a couple different parts. The first part is what to consider before you even put pen to paper or start typing on your keyboard for these applications. And then what are some of the elements to consider when it comes to actually writing it out. So one of the first things to think about when preparing for an application is to engage with the funders and the adopters of the research. So really, it's taking a look at where is this research ultimately going to lead to, and is it in alignment with the funders' ideas, goals, mandates, objectives, etc. So there are a few different ways that you can go about this, and I would probably anticipate many of you are already doing this, but it's also important to continue to highlight it. One of the first places we can take a look at is through our digital communications platforms. And so we all have websites that highlight our research priorities and strategic goals. We have newsletters that you would be able to subscribe to, as well as paying attention on social media, such as LinkedIn, maybe X, Facebook. There's all sorts of platforms out there where we share what's currently active and happening, and then also, maybe importantly, where we're planning to be in terms of some in-person events or other places to interact. Supporting this also is traditional print media, news articles, and that could even be in the digital realm as well. So some of those major organizations will be sharing new outcomes and research that we've been communicating. Another key point on this is not only what the funders and our groups are looking to stress, but also understanding where these production challenges are, especially over the past recent years. So a good example of this is taking a look at maybe the environmental conditions we face on the prairies. How does that factor into how do you develop resiliency from all these stresses such as drought, heat blast, etc. Moving on from that, if you have the opportunity to be able to attend, whether it's in a local area or if you have opportunity to travel a little bit further, is attending events such as their forums, trade shows, webinars such as this, and conferences. And so there are many different events that are put on by either Canola Council or provincial groups across the prairies and beyond that provide opportunities for you to interact with growers directly, potential other decision makers in the industry, as well as also the adopters of this research or these technologies that you're looking to investigate. So all these different types of interactions are very valuable. But sometimes one of the most easiest things is just to reach out to us directly. And so later on in the slides, I'll provide some contact information and also mentioning that we have our research managers and directors present. Our door is always open if you have some ideas that you want to ask about where the values, the mandate and goals are for this maybe current year, or maybe a long-term strategy that we see in the canola industry. All this different types of outreach really help. Just moving on the bottom of that slide, also thinking about those funder strategic objectives. So kind of touched on this already before. If your organization or company or group has a certain mandate or priority, does it align very well with where these funding organizations or programs also have? You kind of want to see if that Venn diagram becomes kind of just two circles overlapped. That's usually a good sign. Adding to this also is what is your team's capacity and expertise? Do you have that expertise or potentially collaborative group to address some of these main issues? And so we're trying to see that overlap as well. Lastly, also taking a look at what's the literature been? So has there been similarly funded research? Have you identified other research groups that are also active in this area? So that kind of works twofold in terms of, okay, we want to make sure that there's not going to be any duplication, but also are there opportunities for collaboration to build on previous work, not necessarily do the same thing over again, or maybe try and tweak it a little bit. That helps when taking a look at maybe more transformational work or really trying to understand the value and impact that newly proposed work can have. So there are a few ways to do this. Mentioning earlier, engaging at these conferences and fora where you may be able to meet these folks in person. But also we have some digital resources such as the Canola Research Hub, which is a repository of a lot of active and recently completed work. And then our provincial associations also have their own databases that you may be able to access. Because currently the Canola Research Hub has a primary focus for work that happens within CARP, as well as for the Canola Agri-Science Cluster that goes back almost 20 years now. And then, of course, and maybe it goes without saying, but continue engaging with the research community, reading that literature, and then also maybe one thing too to note is interacting with private industry as well. And so we want to make sure that we're not kind of occupying separate bubbles in terms of this is what happens in that discovery stage at public universities, but also understanding maybe there's some parallel work or complementary work happening in the private industry that maybe you can find a collaboration to, or at least identify that duplication where it doesn't need to happen. Next step is taking a look at actually writing this application. So a lot of this is related to clarity of the points you're trying to get across. So when you're stating your objectives, deliverables, and outcomes, seeing how they all complement one another, where if a reviewer or the funder of this work is able to read this, they can directly match, okay, these are the high-level objectives, these are the deliverables to achieve those objectives and what you can actually measure against. And then also, are you able to put appropriate timelines to them? Finally, what is the last outcome here is what are the products, knowledge, and technologies that may be produced at the end of this work? And according to this, are you able to measure up against where you would begin at the beginning of the project, and then where would you be at the final stage? And so that way we can actually take a look at what does success look like, and then also trying to figure out what happens next. And I'll mention that a little bit later in depth. The next thing too is taking a look at level of detail with your methodology and budget. And so there are a lot of resources to help along. We do provide a link to a very good description of the value of that treatment list, understanding that needs to be very clearly communicated for this because we need to see where those comparisons are. And then also, again, tying those timelines to your objectives for what you plan to achieve. And so making sure that these timelines are realistic for the capacity of your team, that the resources are being appropriately allocated. And then also maybe of note is, are there going to be risk mitigation measures in place? So an example of this may be if you're conducting a field trial across multiple locations, are you capturing a diverse ecosystem range so that way the outcomes isn't necessarily restricted to one particular region. And then also playing into this is if we have a significant drought year where maybe one particular field trial fails, is the statistical strength of that project still there? If you're going from say 4 trials to, or say 4 site years to 3 site years, does that still tell the story accurately? And then also at the end, making sure that your costs are reasonable. So as reviewers, we're taking a look at these costs and have good comparisons on what we've seen in past work. We do recognize that there is inflation and costs do increase, but they still need to be realistic in terms of what you're trying to achieve. In terms of these 3 slides on successful elements, I like to emphasize this slide probably the most. There's a couple different components to this. We have taking a look at alignment and support, and then also the next steps. So figuring off at the beginning too, we mentioned a little bit earlier on what collaboration means. Collaboration can be direct involvement with these projects, or at least a recognition that there is a pathway and also agreement among others that this is a good approach to be taken. And so where that vote of confidence can come from is through cash or in-kind contributions. This is looked upon quite favorably in terms of these applications, either it's at the LOI stage or the full proposal stage. And then complementing this as well is letters of support. So these letters of support can come from private industry, other organizations that may also have stakeholders involved in the outcomes of this research or have similar strategic goals and priorities. And then in these letters of support, one that directly addresses these challenges and issues at hand and isn't necessarily a boilerplate standard template that may be sent to a whole bunch of people would also be looked upon favorably. Letters of support that also include some of those in-kind contributions. Say if you're working with a private industry member that would be looking at leveraging some of their expertise or capacity or resources, that is also looked upon quite well. Another point on this too is we talked about cash and in-kind contributions. There are also other funding programs that could be applied for to complement, say, a CARP tranche of funding. So that could be some things as, say, Tri-Council funding from ICED through NSERC, MyTax for developing HQP. There may be other industry members willing to put funds forward as well. And there's probably a number of different other funding programs and organizations that may have accessible funds depending on what the scope of your project is, what priorities, what targets you have. It will really depend on each individual situation. The next step too, and this really kind of plays into this chart at the bottom in terms of the technology readiness level, is where does your work kind of fit on this spectrum of research and innovation? So we have kind of that fundamental discovery-based research happening at the early TRL levels. We're starting to test these concepts in more real-world conditions in that validation step in the middle. And then we also have the demonstration, validation, more commercial adoption at the end. And so understanding where your project fits into this, and then identifying what is the next step forward and who are the interested players, parties, organizations that would be then further downstream in this pathway. So that could mean having another project from your team to define and develop this project further. Or if you're a little bit further along this TRL scale, you may need to start considering what is that extension, adoption or commercialization plan. And so do you have strategies, whether it's your team or maybe your organization, to start engaging with those next step of people to see the value and impact of that work? And then what goes into that as well as we're starting to get down that line is intellectual property or licensing considerations. Even at the earlier stages at the TRLs, there should be some considerations on where this will ultimately come up. What we don't want to see is that there would be projects that will have really great promise, but the current regulatory or commercialization landscape doesn't quite fit for that. And so then that may have a negative impact in terms of whether that CARP project will advance for funding or not. The other thing just to mention on that is that the situation, years down the road may be very different. Our regulatory landscape may change, where the priorities may change at different scale levels. And so it's always good to have some of those considerations. Okay, this is one of my last slides. And really this kind of ties into now, especially when you're considering writing your application, is who is your audience? Who are you writing this to? Funding through CARP has a different audience than, say, looking to secure funding from NSERC, right? These proposals are going to be reviewed by funder staff, private industry experts. We also have a peer review process with academics to take a look at the technical merit. We have subject matter experts that have a long and experienced history within this industry that look to evaluate this project in the research and innovation space. And then ultimately, and most importantly, is the research committee members that make these funding decisions. And these are canola producers that are located across the prairies who would be taking a look to either adopt this information, knowledge, technology directly, or potentially indirectly, depending on what that pathway looks like. And so being able to communicate how it would benefit them as an individual, as a group of growers, as an industry at large, these are all important considerations when you're writing this proposal. So some of the elements that reviewers will consider is the technical feasibility of this work, especially if we're thinking about early TRL stages, appropriateness of that methodology. Are there other approaches that maybe should be taken, or is this the correct one? Research capacity, team composition. This can include both your internal team that's happening within your group at your organization, or it could also think about your collaborative space in terms of partnering with other institutions, groups that may have increased capacity or potentially other infrastructure or knowledge of a certain process or method that would really complement your work. Other considerations include the likelihood of commercial adoption. This is also a key component in terms of the overall evaluation. It isn't just about does it address a priority and is the methodology good? We also have to identify that pathway forward. And then also, and again, mentioning the alignment with the needs of canola producers. So that is also very important. Just for my speaking bit wrapping up here, I just want to really encourage everyone to reach out if you do have ideas, questions, or thoughts. More dialogue is always good in terms of helping refine proposals before that submission stage. We do screen and look through a lot of these proposals, and so being able to see high quality, high impact proposals earlier on definitely helps us, and hopefully we can answer those questions before we get into some of these formal review stages. And so just listed here are some email addresses of us that you would be able to reach out to. We'd be able to potentially schedule a meeting or quick call, or maybe this can be done by a quick email correspondence. So again, definitely don't hesitate to reach out. And lastly, the important part here, what are the timelines for this CARP intake? And so we call this CARP 2027 because this is for funding of projects that would happen either on or after April 1st, 2027. And so we will be opening up this call fairly soon, in about 11, 12 days on April 21st. You will have just over a couple of months to submit your LOI on June 26th. We will then be reviewing these LOIs and requesting full proposals, or at least letting know of decisions on August 10th. And those full proposals will be due on the 25th later that fall. We will then go through another round of evaluations, and then we will hope to have our funding decisions laid out for you all during the week of December 15th to 19th before the year is done. You will be able to find those letter of intent templates on the Canola Council website. We do have a tab for the Canola Agronomic Research Program. These websites are usually updated just before the LOI call goes out. And so please be on the lookout for new and updated information as it becomes available. Another thing just to note is that we also have a crop production research notifications email subscription that you'll be able to subscribe to on that website. And that will be able to provide a direct notification if you'd like to know more about CARP or other canola-focused research programs. So that's it for me now for this webinar. What I'm going to do now is pass it off to our funding organizations for some presentations on their perspectives, as well as highlighting some of the research priorities overall, as well as for this current intake. We're going to go in order of our logos here from organizations. So first up will be Doug Heath from SaskOilseeds, followed up by Amy Delacki with Manitoba Canola Growers, and then also with Brittany Vischer with Alberta Canola.
All right, good morning. I'm Doug Heath, the research manager with SaskOilseeds. And I'll just give a bit of background on how our organization gets money to fund research. So in 2025, canola production in Saskatchewan was 12.1 million acres, and that's yielded 12.2 million tons. So averaging 1.01 tons per acre, roughly. And off of every ton that's delivered to an elevator, we would collect 75 cents. So that gives us an annual levy of between 8 and 9 million on average, and 40 to 45% of that is spent on research through various funding competitions. And this is just our strategic plan that's just finishing this year. But so 40 to 45% is spent on successful innovation. And the rest, we also do communications, government advocacy, increasing market demand. So trying to increase our market share in other areas of Canada and around the world, as well as operational excellence. So in any given year, we generally have more than 110 active projects, and that's everything from large 5-year projects, including canola cluster and other initiatives, and all the way down to 1-year smaller demonstration plots, such in programs such as Adopt in Saskatchewan. And with ADF and CARP together, we initiate more than 20 research projects each year. So just from left to right, so provincially, we're involved with Saskatchewan's ADF competition, as well as in Alberta, there's the Agriculture Funding Consortium. And we also fund some projects with Manitoba SCAP. And then moving over to the CARP, which we're talking about today, that's prairie wide. Well, we fund all across Canada. And then the two on the right are the agri-science clusters. So we're involved with 3 clusters, and we like to leverage our money that we've invested through applications to NSERC and MyTax as well. And so our funding partners are also WGRF and RDAR. So at SaskOilseeds with canola, we generally have 3 broad research themes right now. So agronomy, which could include things like best management practices for growing canola, both profitably and sustainably. So looking at things like reduced nitrogen loss for environmental and profit protection, integrated pest management, how to deal with abiotic stress and that sort of thing. The second is pre-breeding genetic trait discovery. So we're looking at germplasm development and funding upstream trait development and discovery tools so that all breeders can have access to the best traits, and while also preventing duplication of discovery efforts by each breeder. So if we just let all the breeding companies, I guess, compete for trying to find new disease resistance genes, then they're all spending the same amount of money looking for the same genes. Whereas if we fund the upstream pre-breeding work, that'll give us access to new disease resistance genes, for example, that every breeder can access. So we're trying to make it more efficient. And it also lets us fill the pipeline with new disease and abiotic stress resistance genes, so we can keep ahead of evolving pests and environmental conditions. And it also looking at traits to increase yields for farmers as well. So both increase yields and other traits that that will protect yields. And the third category is utilization. So looking at new uses for canola oil and meal. So things that increase the value of canola product streams to support canola commodity prices for farmers. So in order to do that, we're more focused on bulk usage of canola oil and meal, and less so focused on high value products that are manufactured from small amounts of meal or oil. And yeah, so just to reemphasize that proposals must demonstrate that there's going to be an end benefit to farmers. And so it's also good to know what research is currently going on in Canada and around the world. So good resources are the Canola Council's Canola Digest, and the research edition, which comes out once a year. That gives a good overall view of what's currently going on. And as well, the Canola Research Hub will let you search for past and current research. And you can also look on the SaskOilseeds website for our research results, which have both current and past research projects summarized. All right, that's everything for me. So you can contact me here.
So to avoid some duplication, because I think Chris and Doug did a really good job of highlighting kind of the importance and a lot of things that we share amongst our groups in terms of the CARP program and the application process and things. So from Manitoba canola growers, we, like Doug, are a grower organization. So we have a board of 8 growers, and our research committee and all of our research funding does go through our research committee, which is a committee of 5 growers. So that is really where the table where some of our funding decisions are made, is at that group with growers. So just highlighting Chris's comments on making sure, understanding your audience of who's reviewing some of these proposals and how to highlight the value, knowing that we are reviewing it and peer reviewers, but really the funding decisions does come down to our research committee of a group of growers from Manitoba. So our research program really focuses broadly on investing in projects and programs that match farm priorities to improve the sustainability of Manitoba farms, and framing the sustainability conversation in terms of profits. So working towards improved and stable profits for canola acres. The people involved, so providing safe and manageable production options for farmers, and then the planet. So increasing the longevity of Manitoba farmland and reducing negative environmental impacts of canola production. So that's very broad. What we look to do in our entire research and agronomy program. And our program really consists of 4 main pillars. We have our research project funding, which is really what we're talking about today. This is where the CARP program falls for MCGA, as well as some of the cluster programs as Manitoba SCAP, ADF, AFC, similar things that Doug, we review a number of different funding calls as well. But then we also put research funding towards applied research programs. So that's going to be some of our on-farm research that we lead internally, as well as our canola diagnostics program. Our variety trials used to be in there as well. So that's just another pool of money to be aware of. And we do collaborate closely with some of the CARP projects and some of the more traditional research project funding through some of our applied research projects as well. And then we also fund research capacity and development through capacity calls, mostly with other co-funders. And then we also have agronomic extension services in this bucket. So when we look at our overall research priorities, so these are what our board has set and what typically doesn't change year to year. So, doesn't change greatly. So this really encompasses like all the things that drive canola value for Manitoba producers. So looking at research that increases potential and stability of canola, protecting canola from current and emerging pests, improving nutrient use efficiency, reducing and improving environmental impact, harvest loss and storage, as well as making sure that we have supply of high quality canola to meet current and future end use demands. So really similar to Doug in terms of his utilization, agronomy, as well as pre-breeding. It's just laid out a little bit differently. And then we also review and set annual funding targets each year. So this is what we take to our committee, and we look at what we're currently funding and what the current challenges are, and make sure that we have money and we are funding projects that help the current or immediate future need that we have, and make sure that we're representing that. So we will set targets of each year. So currently right now, our targets actually didn't change from last year because we still felt that there was a need in the same areas. So verticillium and blackleg, risk through agronomic and genetic solutions, yield stability and environmental extremes, risks and opportunities for profitability of canola, which is one that we have had trouble filling and have had some targeted outreach towards because it's kind of a different type of target. Nutrient management, weed management, we fund some of that through our whole farm calls as well. So not necessarily CARP, as it's typically a whole farm project, but we do look at them through CARP as well. And then flea beetle management has been on there since I started 5 years ago, so it hasn't gone anywhere. So that's really where we sit for 2026 and 27, these funding calls for MCGA. And then with that, that's my contact information. So happy to answer any questions about MCGA specifically, but that's all I got.
As Chris introduced me, my name is Brittany Fisher, and I'm the research director with Alberta Canola. And just to stay on the same path as Doug and Amy, I just wanted to speak to Alberta Canola and that we are owned by farmers and governed by farmers. So I listed our 12 regions here on the map and each director within one of those regions. I also included photos of our research committee, which is comprised of 6 directors, 5 of those specifically on the research committee, and then the 6th one is our Alberta Canola's chair. And so he sits on all committees at Alberta Canola. And so these are the farmers that are evaluating the LOIs and full proposals that you guys are submitting. And they're the ones that are identifying what's needed within the farming community. And to stay consistent, I wanted to mention harvested area is just over 6.3 million acres. Total production, though, is just over 6.5. So just over half of Saskatchewan's capacity. So initially, when I came into this role, we really just had 3 committee objectives, and they were very broad. If you'd submitted LOIs before, you could identify that potentially it would fit under all 3 objectives that Alberta Canola used to have. And so with that, we've kept them as our committee objectives and we've dug more into funding targets. But I just wanted to state that these objectives are still true, finding sustainable and efficient ways to grow and use canola in Alberta, and finding best practices for pest management and other production problems facing growers, in addition to finding research gaps and funding those areas. So to get more of a targeted approach for LOIs and full proposals and really figuring out what we wanted to see full proposals on, I did create this research symposium to hear directly from farmers in areas that we were visiting. And the research symposium traveled with our AGM. And so for the 3 years that we had done it, you can see at the bottom there, Lethbridge, Grand Prairie, and Red Deer, we separated farmer responses from, say, life science or agronomist responses. And so I'm just showing you here what the farmer responses were, and that they were relatively in alignment regardless of area. And if you're familiar with Alberta, those are from the north all the way to the south. So we have a very diverse representation of Alberta and farmers here. And so these are more things that bother farmers and not that they worry about, not necessarily that there are research projects that need to be initiated, but yeah, something that bothers them. So we took that into consideration when creating our funding targets. And I just listed the 6 headings or the 6 topic areas. You can go online to our website, albertacanola.com, and it's outlined quite easily. Straightforward, I should say. So under research and funding targets, there's more in-depth information on each of these 6 points and topic areas. My leave here, because I just returned earlier this year from a leave, my cover cross-reference these priorities with Canola Council. And so you can actually, rather than just saying, hey, we want to look at disease projects, you're going to have a more guided information as to what specifically we're interested in diseases. So I like pie and a good pie chart. So this is one that I included in our newsletter this spring. It's just an example to show you how much money is asked from us how much these projects cost and how much we're actually able to accept. So for 2025 and 2026, we were able to contribute to 16 full proposals, which amounted to just over $1.42 million, which is the highest that Alberta Canola has been able to contribute to research so far. And those are just through 2 intake streams of CARP and AFC. And so of those 16 proposals, just cost under $6 million. And like I said, within that 1.42 that Alberta Canola is able to fund, I divided that up further into other areas. And so these, I would say 4 of the 5 is actually going back to that previous slide of our funding targets. However, soils is also listed here. That's not necessarily a priority. However, this one project that came across was something that the research committee saw value in, and so that one did move forward as well. And so because of the cost of these projects, and nothing is getting cheaper these days, I just wanted to highlight how much we do rely on co-funding with our partners to make sure that we have such a robust research portfolio. And lastly, we did have a research symposium this last year. My cover, who many of you probably know who Autumn Barnes is, she did put out a research survey to collect more current funding targets. And so this was done through 2 phases. The first one being quantitative, which was online. We got 351 respondents, and the follow-up qualitative collection, we had 55 respondents. And so that will hopefully be coming in for, well, most likely, the funding targets will be adjusted for the following funding cycle. So this year, everything on our website is up to date. However, they most likely will change next year. So with that, I am all done.
Great. Thank you so much, Brittany. Okay, so now we're going to move on to just a couple more presentations with some of our partners for the Canola Agronomic Research Program. And first up will be Sherry Stridehorse, the Research Program Manager for Crops at RDAR, Results Driven Agriculture Research. Following that, we'll have a quick slide presentation from myself on behalf of Western Grains Research Foundation. Valar Gurusamy, who is our key contact and research manager there, was unable to join today.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for the opportunity. So as Chris said, I am the Research Program Manager for Crops at RDAR, which is Results-Driven Agriculture Research. So we just actually got out of 2 days of strategic planning with our board, and what I am going to present on today was emphasized at our strategic planning session. So RDAR's mandate is to target strategic investments in producer-led results-driven agriculture research that achieves competitiveness, profitability, productivity, and sustainability of agriculture in Alberta. Really that what Brittany, Amy, and Doug were all talking about, that benefit to the producer at the end of the day is really critical for RDAR as well. And we do fund researchers across the prairies, across Canada, given that there must be a benefit to agriculture in Alberta. So 2 of the must-haves that RDAR is looking for is research results that provide economic benefits which can be adopted by producers, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. And RDAR's language terminology about delivering that is a clear path how results will reach the final mile. So this RDAR final mile, this is actually a field of canola at home on the farm, and you can kind of get that visual here that we want to make sure research does not end at academia, and that a published paper is not the end point of the research that RDAR wants to be funding. So really making sure that in your proposal that there's a very clear path to where your research fits in that continuum and what the plans will be to get that research to the farm. So really trying to change the narrative, bridge the gap so that there is a plan for farm readiness with measurable outcomes that benefit the farm. So we want projects that do benefit producers, and really this economic lens is becoming more and more important for RDAR. As I suggested, I am from a farming family, and I always am asking the question, how much is this going to cost? And that's something that, the technology that you are developing in your research program, we want estimates of how much is this going to cost, and therefore what is the return on investment. So if it's going to cost $10 an acre and the benefit is $7 an acre, of course that's not going to jive. So that cost part, the economics are really important for RDAR. And then the next part is who can help implement the change, or how will the technology move through the regulatory process? How will it move to commercialization? We want researchers to be thinking through the entire process there, from the research side to the farm side. So to help achieve that, one of the kind of check boxes that we're looking for is the concept of T4P, and that's a little bit confusing because it's 3 Ps in a partnership. So the producer, have you talked to one producer or many producers? Make sure that your research has had that farmer lens through it. I reflect on a project that came up last year, and everything was looking good in the review process, and then it came up of this will delay seeding by 2 weeks, and every farmer's face in the room just fell. So making sure that whole farmer lens is put on your project and what the implications of your research will mean on farm. Public would be the academic partners at university or government, and then private is that if you need a commercialization partner. So all of these partners are what is aimed at trying to achieve that final mile in RDAR funded projects. I think it's important to reflect on some of the top reasons that we've seen for decline, so kind of pitfalls to avoid. The first thing is, we think a project looks good, we send it for technical peer review, and methodology issues are flagged. So I think that's fairly standard in the scientific community. But here, this part of the poor economic analysis, or a lack of an economic analysis within your funding proposal, just even some of that basic napkin math. What is this aiming to look like for costs and ROI, that kind of thing. Lack of a commercialization plan or research learnings. So really, again, as I've said, that whole concept of final mile, once you've finished the 3-year proposal, for example, or the work in that 3-year proposal, where to next, and how will it be implemented on farm, or what's the pathway to that implementation. Some of the other deficiencies, lack of collaboration, so that team of one, gaps in the research team expertise. I think particularly with the focus on economics, the focus on the farm, making sure that your research team does include an economist, for example, if there is a commercialization pathway, members from that, to get those other lenses on the project so that it really is farm ready. We really need projects that benefit the producers. If you are looking at a project that is a new chemical of some sort that will require PMR registration, making sure that trials are done to set up the data package that will support that regulatory approval. And then also a project, with the provincial or national strategy going this way, we don't want to see a project going in an opposite direction. I want to emphasize a few of the things on farm. Our economics and logistics drive so many farm decisions. So it's really important for researchers to understand how farms work, what their constraints are, what logistical hurdles exist. And we encourage you to spend extra care and time thinking about the real world implications of your research and how that is going to implement on farm. So I think there was a question about letters of support and industry support. So RDAR as a funder is looking for leverage through cash and in kind. Leverage with the other funding partners here, but also, if there are commercial partners involved, what is the cash contribution? Making sure there's industry buy-in and investment So we're looking for impactful letters of support, not something along the lines of, Corteva feels that verticillium is an important disease in canola. We're looking for something really more meaningful, well-written recommendations with specific references to the outcomes of your research project. Cash contributions, I know, are harder to secure, but they speak very, very loudly. And if there are in-kind contributions, it's not just, we talk to so-and-so and it's an hour of their time, but really true in-kind contributions are very meaningful. Field trials, technical support, disease nurseries, products or things like that. And one of the other flags is that I know sometimes people feel multiple letters of support look good. I recall going through a project where there was 8 letters of support attached, and I thought, this is fantastic. I open the first one, read it, that looks good. The next one I go, oh, that's the same letter with a different letterhead. So making sure it's not just those boilerplates that you as a PI might write and then ask different people to put on their letterhead. It does need to be meaningful and impactful from that particular industry supporter. A couple of tips on the best proposals, and I know Chris went through this really well, but what I think all of us are looking for is a clear framework of what your proposal will achieve, how your work fits into the larger research framework. So in my very simple image here, let's say your project proposal is the blue puzzle piece. How does it link in with the previous work, upcoming work, parts of different research initiatives that have been conducted, what kind of proof of concept, show us that big picture so your research project isn't just one floating out there in the ether, but how it integrates and moves the entire industry forward. I think I've said that, and how it's going to outline a path forward. So, what might the purple puzzle piece look like after the blue puzzle piece is completed? Do want to emphasize, think about regulatory considerations, licensing implications, IP, and particularly when we have collaborators from multiple academic institutions. We've run into issues where the applicants say, we'll just defer to our institutional IP policy, but when there are conflicts between IP policies from different institutions, what then? So we do want you to be talking to your collaborators at that level and what this is going to look like. And as I mentioned, commercialization plans. So RDAR does have 2 kind of funding buckets. So sustainable CAP from the federal government. And of course, this is not eligible for AAFC applicants to receive. But right now, the current sustainable CAP window is ending. So we can fund sustainable CAP with an expenditure period to December 31st, 2027. So given that these projects will be starting April 2027, there's kind of only that 8-month period there. Reporting would be due January 31st. So here we'd be looking for partnerships if we are using sustainable CAP dollars or supplementing with RDAR's main funds. I do want to flag, though, that the next federal, territorial, provincial negotiations do begin in July 2026. So right now we kind of have a short window on our sustainable CAP funds, but are looking forward to what that next federal funding will look like. The other bucket of money that we have are what we refer to as main funds, and these are from the Alberta provincial government. Here we do have an expenditure period to March 31st, 2030. So given that April 31st or April 1st, 2027, that this CARP intake would be looking at, we can fund up to 3 years of that project. So this is really important to think about. RDAR will, if we are going to consider a project that is in the 4-year timeframe, we must have partners to leverage that. So just one of our current constraints right now, and we are looking forward to a renewal from the provincial government, but right now we are dealing with an end date of March 31st, 2030. So with that, I will pass things back to Chris, and happy to take any questions. And my email address was on the first slide, but I think Chris had that as well.
Anyways, okay, so right now, I'm just going to present this one slide that was provided by the Western Grains Research Foundation. They are a very key partner in terms of collaborating with our provincial associations in supporting CARP, and want to really highlight that they have their own set of research priorities. Now, the WGRF is not just canola, but they also have and fund other commodity groups or I should say other commodity projects as well. And so looking at these priorities, we see that kind of split into production as well as variety development. So on production, we're taking a look at cropping systems, crop nutrition, pest management, production management, soil quality, water use efficiency, fertilizer use efficiency, climate change, crop quality, storage pests, and also economic analysis. So a broad gamut in terms of what are the really key priorities facing producers today and all things that can be considered. On the other side, we also have variety development. And so this is also considered kind of very broad in this context, but also I think we should give mention to canola's kind of innovation and the breeding landscape, where we do have a lot of private breeding interests kind of taking elite germplasm to develop commercial varieties. But there's also a very important pre-breeding component as well. And so that can also encompass things such as breeding methods, the pre-breeding activities, pest-resistant development, that is very important. Also looking at crop quality and variety trialing, which probably has a little less of importance in the canola world right now. And again, if you want some more details, I had some contact information with Valar Gurasamy, who is our research program manager working with us in CARP, and you can also find more information on their website. Okay, all right. So just to kick off for this, maybe a question that I'm starting to see here too is that we have some people interested from maybe more the private industry side, developing some products that are a little bit later stage on the TRL. So maybe as a kickoff question here, maybe we can provide some perspectives on how can private industry potentially participate in CARP? Where would it make sense, and where would it maybe not make sense? Doug, maybe could you go first on this one?
Yeah, I'm struggling a bit with this question, but it would be on a case-by-case basis. We likely wouldn't fund like a really late stage commercialization type of project where it's just benefiting one company. But if it's earlier on and it's potentially an industry-wide benefit, that's more so where we would look at in CARP. So maybe that's just an initial statement. If anyone else wants to add something.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Like an earlier TRL, when it's with the potential for commercialization later down the pipe affecting more growers, yeah, we'd be more interested with the lower TRL for private. But again, to what Doug said, it would be a case by case. It's not a generalization that if you have a low TRL and your private industry will absolutely fund it. It has to be something that's going to benefit majority of canola growers in Alberta, as it's their money that will be used to fund it. And we don't necessarily want them to be paying for it again once it gets commercialized further.
Maybe Chris, I'll just weigh in because RDAR does fund more at the later TRL levels. And again, though, a benefit to a specific company is a very hard thing to do unless that company has come forward with significant cash and can show that bigger benefit to the wider industry. So not won't consider, but a lot more caution there in that space. And it still needs to be a quality project that can pass peer review, and it does really importantly need to show benefit to producer in that economic piece and the ROI and the implications of logistic and economic realities on farm.
Yeah, like I can't say I have much to add to that. I just echo the other groups in terms of where we would stand on that involvement, I guess.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I definitely agree with that all. Amy, maybe I'll you can keep your mic on for a bit here. There's a question in the chat from Emma. Can you please give some more detail on what you would specifically prioritize for the profitability risk and opportunity funding stream?
So that came out of our research committee directly. So we actually have 2 people on our research committees that have a master's in ag economics who are farming full-time now. So they were really wanting to look at some of the profitability analysis of growing canola and producing canola, as that's come under question a lot in the recent years with costs of inputs and prices of canola and how that can look. So we were really thinking originally that that would be like coming through an ag economics type of department versus being like running ROI type analysis on some agronomy projects, but not saying that we don't value those types of analysis on all of our project types. But that specific point was looking at more of a focus on the profitability of growing canola and where the risks and opportunities might be to increase that profitability. If that, it's kind of vague, sorry. But still rounding out what that would look like and what types of groups we would need to work on that. So would be very open to having more conversations of that. Okay.
Thanks, Amy. There is a question here from Blake kind of earlier in the chat. What is the average project length in years for CARP funded projects? Is there a maximum project length? I can answer kind of the first part. We usually see projects kind of happen between 3 to 5 years, I would say. Sometimes we have ones that are a little bit maybe shorter period of time, but we also see potentially renewals of those projects that continue successfully when that makes sense. I don't know if we've ever had a maximum length restriction. I think usually we see 5. I don't think we've ever seen 6+.
No.
I don't know if anyone wants to correct me on that, but I feel like 5 is usually the max.
Yeah, because when you get higher than 5, it gets more costly. So we would rather see like a continuation reapplication after the 3 or 5 year mark. I would say on average, though, it's usually 3 years. We get some that are 2, we get some that are 5, but 3 is a pretty good. Yeah, but there's no maximum. All comes down to cost in that aspect.
Okay, great. So I see we've had a number of, oh, no, go ahead, Sherry.
Chris, can we just go back to Emma's comment, and Amy gave a great answer. Just from the Alberta perspective, you know, in some of the touring that we've done in the brown soil zones, there's definitely issues with profitability of canola. So I think, you know, while that's a Manitoba specific, you know, listed priority, it doesn't mean it isn't in other parts of the prairies. And I think it's a wonderful initiative, Amy, that you guys have.
Thanks, Sherry. Appreciate that perspective. I agree that brown soil zone tour was excellent, understanding the limitations and challenges in different areas. We have had a number of questions through the Q&A that look to have been asked and answered so far, but if there's any questions that maybe haven't been answered or we want to follow up, please raise your hand and we can answer them again. I'll give a few moments there for any. Okay, I see Harmeet has a question. Let me unmute you so you can answer it or ask it. Okay, you should be able to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Those were great points, everyone. I just had a question about the IP. So usually when you're working with the industry, when industrial germplasm gets involved, many times the industry would want to hold the IP. So how can that be addressed in a project, or how detailed it should be addressed? I think there was a point raised about just saying that it will follow institutional guidelines might not be enough, but I think that'll be great if you can elaborate on that point.
I'm Happy to start that since I made that comment. And so, you know, if there is an industry partner, and this is different for each group, so I will be speaking specifically for RDAR, that if, you know, there is an intention for all of the traits to be made available to one particular company, there is a very high expectation that that company gives significant funding towards this project, and it is clearly outlined how that company is benefiting and what they're putting for skin in the game. One of the other considerations that we are having is if this company is international, what is the benefit to Canadian farmers before that technology is released across the border in the US or things like that? So the more detail, Harmeet, that you can provide there and the more conversations you can have, the better. And if any of the grower groups want to provide a little bit different perspective there, I think that might be valuable.
I really don't have anything to add. I agree with you, Sherry. In that case, it's absolutely, yeah, I have nothing to add.
Yeah, I
Thank
think we see this in other situations as too with funding frameworks. I'm reminded of like some funding consortium approaches with breeding companies as well, that they will put dollars in, and then that's also allows their access to that germplasm to be used in their programs. Given this as grower dollars, there's not necessarily that same kind of give and take, but Sherry mentioned that if there's benefit to be had by a private company, then they should be able to, like, without being too crass, put their money where their mouth is.
And often in proposals, there's a mix of private germplasm as well as public breeding program germplasm, so that the discoveries can be shared. But SaskOilseeds doesn't look for a share of the IP, but I don't know if Sherry wants to comment on Alberta's situation.
Yeah, for RDAR, IP goes to the inventor or whatever your academic policy is. But if you do not commercialize that, then RDAR would want to make sure that we can step in and make sure stuff doesn't sit on the shelf. So just to be clear, RDAR does not want to hold IP, but we want to make sure stuff does not sit on the shelf. So we do want the PI to have a plan there.
And I guess I'll follow up too for Alberta canola and IP. Currently, we're similar to Doug within that agreement that, yeah, we want that if there's any money that is made, royalties or anything, for that to then be reinvested back into the institution, specifically within canola research.
Thanks. I see another question through the chat. With regard to funding eligibility, can a nonprofit organization involved in food security and climate change apply for funding in collaboration with partners? My initial thought is yes, but would welcome other thoughts here as well. That's a broad perspective, I guess. Food security and climate change is a key production challenge too.
Sorry, where's that question?
It's in the chat, not in the.
Oh, okay.
Maybe my quick answer is there needs to be benefit back to the farm. And so not against that, but what is the benefit to the farmer at the end of the day, and how does it raise the level of everyone in the industry?
And it needs to meet our priorities. We need to have collaboration, and it needs to be applicable to farmers. So I don't know specifically for food security and climate change you would be looking at, but we do have some, like for Alberta canola, we do have funding targets that outline abiotic stresses and such. So I mean, as long as it aligns with our priorities, if it's really outside, like I mentioned in my presentation, it's not that we only select projects that are within our funding targets, but there's a higher chance of success of those projects to move forward if they align within our priorities. So we do take the odd one that doesn't, because we don't ever want to say, we don't want there to be a great proposal to come across our table. It doesn't align, and say, no, it doesn't align. No, we're interested. It's just a lower percentage of it being successful in competition with all the other ones that do align. So.
And I would also recommend having a good tone in the proposal for farmers. So don't come at it from an angle that farming is bad and farmers are doing it all wrong, because farmers think that they are sustainable and are doing a good job with the environment.
And it's farmers reading these proposals. So
Yeah, we have a few more questions here. We'll try and stick to kind of the hour and a half time limit we imposed on ourselves, unless there's some really good discussions following up. But one of them was, does CARP fund research of pests of canola that are also pests in other crops? Can some of the co-contributions come from non-canola commodities in this case? And so Doug, you did answer this briefly a bit here too, that we do look at some. Are there any other thoughts in terms of non-canola specific pests research?
I guess from MCGA perspective, like that is where it's almost nice to see a project come through ADF or AFC or Manitoba SCAP, because then you're matching some government funding that's not commodity specific in a cleaner way than getting some of that funding and then coming to us with it as co-funding already attained. Like it's just a more streamlined process of getting some of that like non-commodity specific funding to support that work. As canola growers, like we at the MCGA, if it affects canola, we're very open to funding it. We have a lot of those projects, like weeds is one in particular, right, that affects many crops. We just typically look to make sure that we're partnering with other funding groups for that type of funding.
And it does probably get confusing to researchers as to understanding what streams fit best and who's involved in what stream or what consortium. So AFC is for Alberta and ADF is for Saskatchewan. However, say if they're Alberta canola does not sit on ADF, but if there is a project that Doug thinks that Alberta canola would be interested in, he could come and ask me if I would be interested in reviewing it, and all the processes that follow with that. But the majority, I think ADF is probably the largest intake stream for multi-commodities and multi-provinces. Would I be wrong?
I would probably agree. Our Manitoba program is just not super functional. It's not the same type of like annual call that you would see through Alberta or Saskatchewan. We actually see a lot of our Manitoba researchers applying through ADF for some of that work.
Are there many, sorry, and this is a question just for Doug, are there many Alberta and Manitoba organizations on ADF?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say probably then ADF would be the best bet to get the most amount of people to look at it if it's multi-crop across the prairies.
Okay, yeah, that's actually a really good, because it was going to be one of my follow-up questions, talking about how we interact between Agriculture Funding Consortium, AFC, Agriculture Development Fund, even at Manitoba SCAP, how we're all kind of seeing similar things. Maybe a really quick roundtable. How do each of us interact with those three other programs? And how does that play into us seeing submissions through CARP? Because CARP is usually the last call for that's available or open. Sherry, maybe you go ahead first.
Sure. Yeah, so RDAR does lead AFC in that we provide the administrative support. I am the chair of AFC. That LOI intake is actually closed already. So for this funding cycle, that window is shut down. RDAR does also sit at ADF, so we look at funding proposals that come through there. Of course, we're here at CARP. With the CARP call, we are looking for highly strategic canola priorities. very targeted. And so, you know, if you have a specific canola project, and we do have the co-funders here, there's great opportunity for leverage to be high priority projects that I do depend a lot on the guidance from the other provincial grower groups to say, this is going to move the needle or not. So that's what I get in CARP. Not to say that I don't interact with the Manitoba Sustainable CAP. So we're pretty flexible, but CARP is really that focus place for getting canola specific projects. And it's great. All the funders are here. In ADF, you do have that Saskatchewan government leverage for projects across the prairies.
Maybe Brittany, Doug, then Amy.
So Alberta canola mainly, like I mentioned in my presentation, AFC and CARP are the two main annual funding streams that we're a part of. So one thing I didn't make overly clear when I was speaking to ADF and AFC is that AFC is for Alberta-based projects and then ADF is for Saskatchewan-based projects, like location-wise. So if you're applying to AFC, you'd want that to then relate to Alberta farmers. But yes, we do get questions from other groups, but we don't sit on those meetings to review LOIs and proposals, say through ADF or Manitoba. So canola specific, CARP, and then multi-commodity or Alberta based through AFC.
Am I up?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so SaskOilseeds sits on Alberta's AFC program. I think we started that a couple of years ago now. We typically fund more through the ADF, the Saskatchewan ADF program, just because we've been doing that the longest. And with the Manitoba SCAP, we would fund things where, say, Manitoba Crop Alliance or Manitoba canola growers would approach us with a proposal that they think that we would want to fund, but we wouldn't typically look at all of the LOIs through the Manitoba SCAP at all. And so, yeah, any proposal where there's the potential for provincial or federal funding dollars, we would rather have it go through that sort of competition than CARP. But there is still the opportunity. So with money from WGRF and RDAR through the CARP program, it's still favorable for us to co-fund it as well. So we would look at if a proposal was submitted to multiple programs, we would try and figure out earlier than later which competition it would have a better chance of success through with more co-funding.
So from a Manitoba perspective, I think it's important to highlight for researchers that in the Manitoba SCAP program, it is not the same as ADF. So if you apply, or AFC, so if you're applying through the Manitoba SCAP, we as potential co-funders do not see those proposals. They do not share those proposals with MCGA or MCA or MPSG within Manitoba to review. So we need to be made aware of those projects before the project either goes into SCAP or as it's going into SCAP. So then we can, so it's not the same as like assuming that all the funders in Manitoba get to review those because it got put through the Manitoba SCAP program. We're working on getting a system that allows for a better co-funder review of those projects so that anyone that's interested in co-funding gets to review those LOIs, but there currently isn't a system in place that allows that. It's kind of on a project by project basis with researchers that have brought projects to us and been like, hey, I'm submitting this through SCAP. Just want to make sure you're aware because you might be interested in co-funding it as it's a canola project. So it's different than those other projects in that way, or those other programs. But as MCGA, we do sit on ADF as well as just currently AFC. But really, our main mechanism for funding canola specific projects is still through CARP. We're reviewing projects on there to look at potential whole farm projects that might be of interest to us, as well as some canola projects that have overlap into Manitoba. Because a lot of researchers that are applying there also are doing sites in Manitoba. Because they said like a lot of Manitoba researchers that are at the U of M are applying through AFC or ADF. So we sit on those as well. But
thanks, Amy. A quick word, Sherry.
Yeah, just really quickly, all funders are talking. We're all at these tables, so don't think you can just slip the same proposal with a different title into 2 different calls. The transparency, it's way better if you're upfront and disclose that instead of us figuring it out on our own. So just a word about transparency and the value of that.
Thanks. Just as another note too, there is one other funding program that isn't an annual intake, but the Canola Agri-Science Cluster, which consists of a lot of us present here as well as co-funders. This is currently active right now, and we'll be looking at having an LOI call for this anticipated later this fall for a April 1st, 2028 start date. So just keep that in consideration in terms of this whole ecosystem of funding programs and potential partners and such and that. And then we tend to look at larger scale, broader collaboration proposals that achieve strategic objectives in those cluster funding applications. But just want to make a quick note of that. So we're just kind of at the bottom of the hour here to wrap up our webinar. I really want to thank Brittany, Amy, Doug, Sherry for attending today and providing perspectives on CARP through your own organizations. Thank you very much to everyone attending as well. You will have a recording available of this webinar for review, and we'll also have this uploaded that can be shared and referenced to in the future. If there's any questions or ideas or thoughts that you may have either right now that weren't answered or you come up with later, please feel free to reach out either to myself or the research managers and directors that you see here today. And hopefully you all have a good rest of your day, and hopefully see you in person or through this application process through CARP.